Dear colleagues, dear guests, and particularly our many followers on YouTube, we greatly appreciate your involvement in the seminar on prevention of sexual exploitation and abuse that is brought to you by the UN team in Turkey. The purpose of the seminar is to develop knowledge of PSEA, understanding differences on the different types of sexual exploitation. At the same time, it will introduce participants to the 6 core principles of PSEA. And of course, we will be able to share experiences of different practices of PSEA in Turkey. In terms of our agenda for this afternoon, we have 4 speakers. First, we will have Sophia Pierre-Antoine, the PSEA officer from IOM. This will be followed by Eda Özgür-Kılıç from UNFPA, the GBV and PSEA expert. And then the third intervention will come from Özlem Yazlek, the PSEA focal point for support to life. And then to conclude, we will have the representative of UNFPA, Dr. Hassan Motashami. So without further ado, I would like to move us ahead on what has been a very critical topic that we have learned is essential to understand better. We have seen abuse that has taken place by those that are supporting the communities. And we have also heard many stories that during COVID, the situation of violence against women in particular has also aggravated. So this is a very timely topic for us, a topic in which we must all bear responsibility and take action. So let me invite our first speaker, Sophia Pierre-Antoine from IOM. Over to you, please.
Thank you so much. I'm just trying to set up my screen share. 1 second. Nope. Sorry about that, everyone. It worked during the testing, so I know it will work now again.
I'm sure you'll get it to work.
This always happens. We've been working online for so long and still we have technical issues. Terribly sorry about that. I hope now everything is visible on the screen.
Yes,
thank you so much. Super. Thank you so much for the introductions. So as mentioned, my name is Sophia Pierre-Antoine, and I'm the PSEA officer for IOM at our headquarters in HQ. Please do let me know if I'm speaking too fast for interpretation, and I'll slow down. So I only have about 30 minutes today, so I would want us to walk together through the definitions so we can understand what is sexual exploitation, what is sexual abuse, and then I'll talk a bit also about sexual harassment briefly, just so you can make the difference. I'll also walk us through the 6 core principle by the IASC, which is the Interagency Standing Committee, but a simplified version, so we can make sure that it's easily understood by all of us. And then I'll walk us through the brief history of PSEA at the UN, right? So we'll take a look back at 20 years and see everything that happened to bring us to where we are today. Great. So I hope you can see that I'm changing my slide. Excellent, thank you. All right, so let's start right off the bat with the definition. So what do we mean when we say sexual exploitation? What does that actually mean? So sexual exploitation, first we have to think about who is involved, and it's us, right? Us as humanitarian workers, us as UN officials, us as partners towards our beneficiaries, right? Towards the affected populations, the communities that we serve. So what is it exactly? We know that it's an abuse of power, right? We know that it's a break of trust that these populations put in us. And in a nutshell, it's when the perpetrator, so the one who is committing, right, the SEA, tells the victim that the sexual activity will generate benefits, right? So they will get something in exchange for that sexual activity. So what are a few examples that we unfortunately see? It's offering money, offering gifts, or sometimes even a job in exchange for sex. It's also withholding services or blackmailing. We also see sexual exploitation as paying for the services of sex workers. And because we take this issue very seriously, it's also the threats of it, right? So threats that can be anything that's done written, right? By Facebook, by WhatsApp, on an email, or also by voice, so orally. Now, what do we mean by sexual abuse? Because that's different, right? So sexual abuse, that's also us towards beneficiaries. But in the case of sexual abuse, also, we see also that there is no consent, right? So sometimes there is a use of force, sometimes there is a use of coercion. And we see this element of this physical intrusion of a sexual nature. So the main difference here, really, if you look at these two definitions, is that with sexual abuse, you don't have this promise of a benefit, right? This exchange. You really have the act or the threat of the act. So a few examples we see in a few cases are unwanted kissing, touching or grabbing or rubbing, or the threat, again, something written or something oral of an unwanted sexual act, rape or the attempt of rape, and also any sexual activity with a child. So to remind everyone, a child, right, that's a minor, that's someone who is under the age of 18. But to touch briefly on sexual harassment, just so you see the difference here, sexual harassment, that's internal, right? So it's something that's happening among us. It's something that is unwelcomed. It's something that creates an intimidating environment, something that creates an environment within the workplace that's not respectful. And we've even seen that it becomes conditions of employment. Examples are touching, kissing, or speaking inappropriately, jokes or comments at work or outside of work, the attempted or actual sexual assault, or rape or the attempt of rape. But the key thing here, why we bring up sexual harassment, is who is involved. We see that in this case, the victim is not the beneficiary. The victim is one of us, right? So this is why I wanted to make the quick distinction here, because today, when we're talking about sexual exploitation and sexual abuse, we're talking about these two first categories where the victim is a beneficiary, is a member of the affected population. I hope that's clear for everyone. If not, we'll have time at the end for a Q&A. Now, I would like for us to walk through the IASC, so Interagency Standing Committee, 6 core principles. What you see on the screen, it's been heavily simplified to fit the screen, but also to make sure that it's in simplified language, which would be easier to understand. But if you want to see the full version of the text, of course, you can find that on the IASC website in different languages. So let's walk through it together. What do we mean, or what does the IASC mean when it talks about the first principle? Basically, that SEA, so sexual exploitation and abuse, constitutes acts of gross misconduct and are grounds for termination of employment. Zero tolerance policies, no second chances. The second principle is that sexual activity with children is prohibited. Again, children is anyone under the age of 18. The third principle means that exchange of money, employment, goods, or services for sex is prohibited, including paying for the services of sex workers. The fourth principle is that any sexual relationship with beneficiaries that involves improper use of position, so this abuse of power that we saw in the definitions, is prohibited. The fifth one, humanitarian workers, all of us here today, right, in the audience and as a panel. So all of us are obligated to report any concerns regarding SEA by fellow workers. So we have the obligation to make a report. And finally, the last one is that humanitarian workers, again, all of us, are obliged to create and maintain an environment that prevents SEA, right? So really that is the responsibility of all of us here today to make sure that SEA does not happen within our organizations. So the definitions that I shared earlier, these definitions are almost 20 years old now, right? And they're the general UN definitions. And you may think to yourself, well, that's different than maybe what my organization has, right? But it happens. Sometimes UN agencies change it a little bit. Or maybe if you're part of an NGO, you see that it's slightly different. Or even in academia, or even in the justice or legal system of your country, these words might have a different meaning. But what we're presenting here really is the UN overall definition. Similarly, for the 6 core principles, that was endorsed by the IASC. For those of you who don't know, the IASC is basically a group of UN agencies and NGOs, and they work mostly for humanitarian context, right, in a nutshell. So these were put forward by the IASC, and they're here to serve as a guide for the UN and also as a guide for all of our partners and NGOs or public and private institutions in general. But let's have a look back in time. How did we come to be here today, right? So I'll walk you through a few dates starting in 2002. And again, please, for interpretation purposes, please do let me know if I'm going too fast. All right, I hope my screen is clear for everyone. So we'll start with 2002. So in 2002, what came to be these 6 core principles? That's what we just saw together, right? So the IASC put forth these 6 core principles, and the idea was really to reflect on the commitment of its members to strengthen and enhance the protection and care of women and children in situations of humanitarian crisis and conflict. And so all of these discussions boiled down to these 6 core principles that we know today, even though they were slightly modified recently, but the basic stays the same. Then the following year, so the former Secretary General Kofi Annan, in 2003, in October actually, published his bulletin, which was called the Bulletin on Special Measures for Protection from Sexual Exploitation and Abuse. So this is something that we still use as a reference document to this day. It basically outlined the zero tolerance policy for SEA, and it really introduced this notion of mandatory reporting that we still see in the UN. And this bulletin also codified the 6 core principles and the PSEA framework within the UN. So it really solidified it, right? The definitions, it outlined the scope, the characteristics, and really clarified the responsibility of leadership, right? So this is really a core document for PSEA. Moving forward a few years in the future, in 2007, then we see this victim assistance come to the forefront, right? So there is a comprehensive strategy on assistance and support to victims of SEA. So that strategy is really to establish a commitment, right, within all of the member states to provide the basic cares that we know, basic services as we know them today, which is providing medical care, legal services, psychosocial support to victims of SEA, also immediate needs, right, like material care, medical, food, clothing, shelter as necessary. It also talks about paternity testing and child support claims, right, for children born as a result of this SEA. So we see all of that in that comprehensive strategy of 2007. Moving on to 2011 now, at this stage, IOM is appointed as the official IASC PSEA champion, and IOM will actually keep that mantle for a couple of years. And in parallel, we also see that the AAP framework, which is the, Accountability to Affected Population framework, or the IASC Transformative Agenda, which comes to be. So in this AAP framework, we see there's a series of protocols that come to be, and it's really to improve our collective humanitarian response. And what's really interesting about this document is that it acknowledges that preventing SEA is really important and integral to all of the operations that we're doing, right? Mainstreaming it in a way. Okay, then the following year, but then endorsed in 2013, so the IASC PSEA champion and also humanitarian agencies create what we know as the minimum operating standards on PSEA. So these operating standards, they're endorsed, at the highest levels, the senior focal points, the task force, et cetera. But what are they? They're really minimum standards on what each organization should have, right? So what systems should be in place at the minimum, in a nutshell. So these come to be in 2013. And then we see over the years, there's some work being done, there's some pilot projects tested here and there, which brings us to 2015, when we have two major documents that come to be, which are then endorsed the following year in 2016. So these documents are about community-based complaint mechanisms. So what are they? We see a toolkit that's published, and this toolkit is about these community-based complaint mechanisms. This is what we call CBCMs usually in the short way. And it's really a toolkit, a guide, so that UN personnel, NGOs, community leaders, partners, local communities, really everyone can work together to develop community-based mechanism for filing complaints of misconduct, right? So it's really about receiving misconducts from the communities. In parallel, there's also these standards, global standard operating procedures on these interagency CBCMs that come to be. And this is endorsed, of course, by the IASC. And it was developed because within the last 2 years or so before that came to be, there were a lot of gaps that were identified in programming, in policies between different agencies and funds and programs, how instructions were not clear, et cetera. So these global SOPs were here really to standardize this, to have a protocol and standardize the understanding of PSE action and programming. Okay. In 2016, also something great happens. So we have Secretary General Ban Ki-moon at the time. So Secretary General Ban Ki-moon appoints Ms. Jane Hall-Lute. So Ms. Jane Hall-Lute is appointed as the special coordinator on improving PSEA across the organization, so across the UN in its whole. Right, so Ms. Jane Hall-Lute and in her office, they work with member states, with internal stakeholders, with experts, et cetera. They create protocols. If you're familiar with, for example, this yearly document, which is the Secretary General's annual report on special measures for PSEA, it's her office that handles all of that. Also, all of the high-level meetings, so like the UN Working Group for PSEA, et cetera, that's handled by that office. And it's really to harmonize and to promote PSEA UN-wide. At the same time, in that year, 2016 is quite an exciting year. There's a lot happening. At the same time, the UN launches the trust fund to support victims, right? So what is this trust fund? It's here to finance the cost of like medical, legal, psychosocial services for survivors, but also for children who are born of SEA. It also provides funds for community outreach, for investigations, and protective measures for victims. And it's still ongoing today. So this is when it launched. Moving forward to the next year, still on the topic of victims, right, and the victims' rights and dignity. So now we have Secretary General Guterres, who appoints the victim rights advocate. So that's Ms. Jane Connors. Sorry. So we have Ms. Jane Connors, and her role and her approach is really on the victim-centered approach, right? It's on putting the rights and the dignities of victims really at the forefront of the response to PSEA, right? So we know that Ms. Jane Connors, she's working with victim rights advocates in different regions and different countries, and they really coordinate on how to provide better assistance for victims, again, with this lens of their rights and their dignity at the forefront. Moving on to 2018, so in 2018, there is this new tool that comes to be, which is really great for accountability, I must say, and it's ClearCheck. So what is ClearCheck? ClearCheck is basically a tool to ensure that colleagues, IOM and UN personnel in general, who have committed or have been proven to have committed sexual exploitation and abuse are not then rehired by another UN agency. So how does that work? It's a secure online platform. It's a database, really, that's shared with the different UN organizations. And so the names of colleagues who have committed these crimes are uploaded to that database. And then, during the hiring process, you can check it and make sure you're not rehiring. It's really about transparency and accountability. The following year, again, with this importance of the victim-centered approach, we see the UN's Victim Assistance Protocol endorsed. So that was endorsed back in December 2019. And it's really to provide guidance for all UN organizations on the provision of assistance and also support to victims of SEA. Of course, it was informed by GBV, gender-based violence, and child protection programming and best practices to make sure that it's holistic. And its goal is really to create this set of norms and standards to really strengthen, and make sure that there's a coordinated approach to assistance and support that prioritizes the rights and the dignity of victims of SEA. Last year, now we're catching up with time, last year in 2020, oh, sorry, I'm just realizing my screen never changed. Strange. All right. Sorry about that. So I was talking about last year in 2020. So here it's quite exciting because we have this great tool called Saying No to Sexual Misconduct that launches. And so Saying No to Sexual Misconduct is based on an IOM training package, right? So we developed a training package for partners, but then UNHCR, who was the PSEA champion at the time, and also WFP and other members of the IASC, NGOs, and UN organizations came together to really adapt it for interagency use. So now it's available in multiple languages. You can find it on the IASC website, and it's very interactive. It's very simple and easy to use. There's even an online guide. And it's really to make sure that there is this unified message to all of our partners, really, on what is SEA. So I strongly encourage all of you also to check it out. It's available and easy to use. And I think I'm running out of time. So really the last thing I'll say is for this year, which is for 2021, and UNFPA becomes the IASC PSEA champion in 2021. But I won't speak a lot about that because UNFPA convened this wonderful webinar that we have. So I'm sure they'll talk about all of the amazing things that they have accomplished this year. So I'll leave it at that. But I will say one final thing though before finishing. Of course, thank you for giving me the opportunity to present to you a bit of the history. I hope it was interesting. I find it fascinating to see really all of the progress that we've made in just 20 years, even though we have a long way to go. We really have a long way to go still, but we still have to recognize all of the work that came before us to bring us to where we are. If you have any questions or if you want to reach out, I put my address on the screen. It's the IOM general address for PSEA. I do want to take this opportunity to say as well to everyone listening, if you have any suspicions or just a hint of a doubt that there might be, that an IOM colleague might be committing SEA against a beneficiary, please go to weareallin.iom.int. It's an encrypted and confidential platform, and you can make a report directly there. It goes straight to our Office of the Inspector General, and you can even do it in English, French, Spanish, and Arabic. So with the topic and with accountability, please know that IOM has this confidential platform ready for you to use. So I will leave it at that, and thank you so much.
Sophia, thank you very much. This is great, and we very much appreciate your ending, because this is not meant to be only academic. We're all in this together. So if we see something, we should say something through the appropriate channels. Now, you mentioned UNFPA. That is, of course, our national champion here with the UN in Turkey. So it's a perfect segue to invite Eda Özgür Kilinç to tell us a little bit about the experience of UNFPA and its assessment practices, as well as the PSEA network in Turkey. So Eda Hanım, over to you, please.
Thank you very much. I'm going to share my screen for my presentation. Thank you very much. As mentioned by Alvaro, first of all, I'm going to talk about the UNFPA's self-assessment process, and this will be the general framework of my presentation, as you can see on the slide. So, United Nations Protocol on Allegations of Sexual Exploitation and Abuse involving implementing partners are the basis of our self-assessment process. And this protocol was put in force in 2018. It outlines the obligations of the United Nations to ensure adequate safeguards and appropriate action related to PSEA. And Secretary General's this protocol is aligned with the Secretary General's bulletin published on 9th of October 2003 on special measures on protection from sexual exploitation and abuse, and SGB underlines that SEE has always been unacceptable behavior and prohibited conduct for United Nations staff. United Nations Protocol on Allegations of Sexual Exploitation and Abuse involving implementing partners is our document. It identifies specific standards on protecting the most vulnerable populations, primarily women and children, especially in the field of protection in humanitarian sectors. We are targeting the vulnerable groups, as you know, and SEA is an important point. It's just at the center of the protection sector. It's also relevant to the other sectors. We are trying to disseminate it, mainstream it across all the other sectors. It's important to highlight the fact that following the protocol, assessment processes on PSEA with implementing partners got accelerated. United Nations and its partners have a methodology abided by the rules set in the protocol while assessing partners. Everything on PSEA within the United Nations can be reached at this website you see on the slide. So there are 8 core standards of self-assessment. The first one is the policy, organizational policy for SEA. So there are 8 core standards. Let's have a look at them in general. The second one is human resources system. The third one is mandatory training for staff. And the fourth one is reporting of allegations and claims of sexual exploitation and abuse. And the fifth standard is victims assistance and referral. And the sixth one is investigations. Number 7, corrective measures. Number 8, organizational management and subcontracting. Let's have a look at the first core standard. The partner has a policy document on PSEA. So this is one of our standards or rules, so to speak. At minimum, this document should include a written undertaking that the partner accepts the standards of conduct listed in Section 3 of the SGB 2313. For the prevention, the policy for the prevention of the sexual exploitation and abuse, it is one of the subheadings of our standards. And also the code of conduct should include the prevention of sexual exploitation and abuse, or the code of ethics should at least include just one paragraph regarding PSEA. This was requested from the partners to include that in their policy documents, and also the policy document on PSEA is recommended to be signed by all the staff members. So this is the second core standard, human resources system. There is a systematic vetting procedure in place for job candidates through proper screening. And this must include, at minimum, reference checks for sexual misconduct and a self-declaration by the job candidate confirming that they have never been subjected to sanctions, disciplinary, administrative, or criminal, arising from an investigation in relation to SEA, or left employment pending investigation and refused to cooperate in such an investigation. Actually, at this point, we just checked the reference. We checked the reference because there are some questions in the reference, and one question should be related to SEA, and also in the contract of the employees for the prevention of sexual exploitation and abuse, there is a duty incorporated, because they are going to sign their contracts, and there should be a separate, actually there is a sentence saying, like, I promise not to commit such conduct with SEA. So they need to sign that contract before they start working at the organizations. And in these cases, minimum requirements are deemed to be completed if reference checks are being made through former employees, and if the candidates are made to share their statements on previous SEA. Note, related documents should be kept on personnel file. Personnel contracts should include information regarding the termination of employment in case it is found that the previous SEA history has been withheld. This is one of our strict rules and standards. And the third standard is mandatory training for staff members. The partner holds mandatory online or in-person trainings for all IP employees and associated personnel on PSEA and relevant procedures. The training should, at a minimum, include the following matters: a definition of SEA, and that is aligned with the United Nations definition, and exploitation on prohibition of SEA, explanation on prohibition of SEA, and actions that the personnel are required to take, for example, prompt reporting of claims and allegations and referral of victims. Under training, we requested our partners to provide their annual training plans and schedules or calendars. Maybe there were some organizations that wanted to deliver these trainings once a year or every 6 months. Of course, these are the refreshment training. So initially, we requested it to be mandatory. Then we requested them to provide regular training, refreshment training. So we requested them to provide a training package, because every institution or organization should have a training package, minimum training package, and also list of attendees was also requested from the partners. And the fourth standard is reporting of allegations. The partner has mechanisms and procedures for personnel, beneficiaries, and communities, including children, to report SEA allegations that comply with core standards for reporting, such as safety, confidentiality, transparency, and accessibility. And if you look at the details of that, under that fourth core standard, we requested them to establish complaint mechanisms for SEA. But in these cases, minimum requirements are deemed to be completed through active mechanisms, receiving SEA allegations, ideally through already present complaint mechanisms, and reporting the SEA allegations to the UNFPA Office of Audit and Investigation Services. Actually, in our practice, under this standard, there were such procedures as follows. The implementing partners should have some complaint mechanisms. That was our request from them. It may be through WhatsApp or telephone number in emergency cases, or through email, or there may be some boxes, complaint boxes. They may have all of these mechanisms, or at least just one at minimum level. On the other hand, for the beneficiaries, brochures including these complaint mechanisms, or posters including those complaint mechanisms, should be at the centers, and the brochures should be distributed to the beneficiaries, and the posters should be hung on the most visible parts of the centers or the service areas, so that the beneficiaries can be reached out more easily. for the complaint mechanisms, and we distributed our brochures and posters in this way. And also we requested the partners to make a presentation to inform the beneficiaries about these complaint mechanisms. You know that we have some awareness raising sessions, and we just wanted them to add another session in the prevention of sexual exploitation and abuse in those awareness raising meetings. And we requested them to set a calendar for those awareness raising sessions, for example, at least 2 days a week. This was requested from our partners. And standard 5, victims assistance and referral. The partner has a system to refer SEA victims to locally available support services based on their needs and consent. So this can include actively contributing to in-country PSEA networks and or gender-based violence, which is abbreviated as GBV systems, where applicable, and or referral pathways at an interagency level. There are certain procedures in some of the institutions. There were some gender-based violence systems and standard operating procedures, but if they don't have such a mechanism or department, in order to facilitate the referral process, we requested them to have standard operating procedures. For the victims of gender or sexual exploitation and abuse, this could be a mechanism that they can have access through that organization or through another organization that they may be referred to. And these are the minimum requirements. In these cases, minimum requirements are deemed to be completed. Having an updated list of local service providers, this can be referred to as a service map, and having procedures in place regarding referral mechanisms, as I said before. And of course, these need to be in compliance with the current interagency procedures and practices. The 6th core standard is related to investigations. The partner has a process for investigation of allegations of SEA and can provide evidence. This may include a referral system for investigations where in-house capacity does not exist. Actually, the organization should have an investigation mechanism. If that is not applicable, if that is not possible, we requested them to outsource it to another external organization for the investigations. These are the minimum requirements. In these cases, minimum requirements are deemed to be completed. Professional organizational in-house capacity for conducting professional investigations, or when lacking in-house capacity, confirming that the incoming allegations would immediately be referred to professional organizations for investigation. The 7th core standard is corrective measures. In the next PSEA prevention of sexual exploitation and abuse, we will refer to it as a separate topic. The partner has taken appropriate corrective action in response to SEA allegations, if any. So if there is such an allegation, if there is such a claim, it means that the partner should have already taken some action, corrective action. So we ask our partners to provide evidence of the corrective action. Only in that way we can continue working with that partner. And in these cases, minimum requirements are deemed to be completed. Having no SEA allegations or have taken appropriate corrective action in response to SEA allegations. There is also another note here regarding shared SEA allegations. The unit in charge at the UNFPA headquarters must be informed. If convinced that the partner had taken appropriate corrective actions, the partner can be worked with. And the last core standard 8, organizational management and subcontracting. Partners' contracts and partnership agreements include a standard clause requiring subcontractors to adopt policies that prohibit SEA and to take measures to prevent and respond to SEA. And in these cases, minimum requirements are deemed to have been completed. Subcontracting agreement has a standard clause regarding prevention of SEA and protective measure and response actions for SEA. There is also another note here In accordance with the United Nations IP protocol, since subcontractors are also seen as partners, they are also expected to have similar standards as IPs. These were the standards. Now, partners completing all 8 standards are described as full capacity on PSEA and therefore has right to continue partnership with, after the completion of all these processes. We established a coordination email group with the partners, and with the UNFPA partners, we shared a ready-to-use PSEA awareness-raising presentation with our partners, and also informed them about the process on the PSEA awareness session targeting beneficiaries. Thus, the PSEA topic is included in the awareness sessions. This was under Standard 4, Core Standard 4, by the way. As a United Nations, this is our network for the prevention of sexual exploitation and agency. And before that, I shared our procedure for the PSEA. And now I'm going to talk about what we did under this network for the prevention of sexual exploitation and abuse. So this network has been established by the United Nations Country Team to facilitate the implementation of the United Nations Country Team PSEA work plan that was developed and agreed upon in 2019. The PSEA network has been constituted following a PSEA interagency focal point training in February 2020, aimed at ensuring awareness, raising awareness, and creating a common understanding of interagency PSEA. So what are our responsibilities? What are the responsibilities of this PSEA network? The network is responsible for implementing a coordinated approach to activities by member organizations to minimize the risk of sexual exploitation and abuse by international and national aid workers, staff of agencies and partners, ensure effective response when incidents do arise, and raise awareness of PSEA in Turkey. Currently, UNFPA is the chair organization or the lead organization reporting to the UNCT. And the PSEA network is the primary body for technical level coordination. And oversight of PSEA activities in Turkey. And also the PSEA network covers all UN programs implemented in Turkey. Tasks of the network focus on 4 main areas: management and coordination, engagement with and support of the affected population, prevention and response. These are the 4 main tasks of the network. If I'm speaking very fast, please stop me, because I may be speaking very fast to catch up with the time. Please warn me if I do so. And PSEA network meets monthly basis and consists of 12 UN agencies. The agreed work plan is followed up during the monthly meetings, and the number of our members will be increased. The time will show that. Currently, the network is supported by a small task team of the United Nations agencies, UNHCR, UNICEF, UNFPA, taking up the coordination role. And PSEA task team meets prior to the PSEA network meeting to identify the agenda and share with the network members, and the meeting minutes are shared with the members by task team. And we hold this meeting at least 1 week, or approximately 1 week before the meeting of the network. And as the PSEA network, I just would like to talk about our accomplishments. First of all, establishing mechanism on PSEA. Under this heading, what types of steps have we taken? We developed an interagency complaint and referral pathway and SOPs for information sharing on complaints. And a list of focal points is drawn up and circulated in the group to facilitate linkages with a reliable source, as focal points have the most updated information and referral pathways and services. Mapped of national laws and mandatory reporting laws, along with a greater understanding of internal mechanisms. And also PSEA training mapping study has been held and shared with partners. Accordingly, partners have utilized trainings as mandatory for their personnel. If you remember, out of 8 standards, under standard 3, this training was requested to be made mandatory, and also at international level, some of the files were translated into Turkish by this network. Under the title of Establishing Mechanism on PSEA, ISC PSEA materials were translated in Turkish. And also the network developed common terms of references for PSEA focal points, and we mapped existing SEA reporting channels, feedback and complaint channels, and completed SEA risk assessments of implementing partners by UNICEF and UNFPA. To support this network, the PSEA consultant is hired by UNICEF and UNFPA to support the network. So under accomplishments, we have another category, which is capacity building. We delivered training for the United Nations agencies, PSEA focal points, and also PSEA community messages document has been prepared and translated. These will be distributed shortly for the UN agencies, and also local NGOs. Experiences are shared on SEA risk assessment process by UN organizations, agencies, and also local NGOs. To understand the needs, UNHCR and UNFPA applied a survey for protection and non-protection sector partners, mainly to identify gaps in mechanisms and subsequently look into how the best support to be provided, especially to non-protection actors. And accordingly, possible gaps, challenges, possible deliverables, and activities were identified based on the contextualized survey questions. To identify entry points of community engagement and service delivery, indicators have been selected where PSEA messages can be embedded from the protection sector under 3RP, and currently standard operational procedures, SOPs, is underway. I will continue with understanding the needs. To identify entry points of community engagement and service delivery, indicators have been selected where PSEA messages can be embedded from the protection sector under 3RP for a comprehensive mapping. 2 different platforms have been used as a source of data, namely Activity Info and Services Advisor. SEA risk assessment of implementing partners by UNICEF and UNFPA. In order to finalize the self-assessment process, responsible manager from the respective work plan reviews the assessment and other documents related to the process and prepares a scaling based on the yes and no answers. Each yes answer is worth 1 point. Throughout this self-assessment, once the implementing partner can prove the fulfillment of each minimum standard, the program manager adds yes on the relevant template. In case of not being able to meet the minimum standard, she adds no on the template, and the respective minimum standard is added to the capacity building plan. This is the one I talked about, the no excuse cards. You can see the Turkish and English version of these no excuse cards. As I said, they were translated into Turkish by our network. And now I'm going to talk about reporting mechanisms for UN agencies. These are the reporting mechanisms for PSEA, for the United Nations agencies. So I will wait a bit for you to take some notes. You can see the reporting mechanisms of UNFPA, UNICEF, UNHCR, UNIDO, UNDP, ILO, WFP, UN Women, OCHA, FAO, and WHO and IAM. Thank you very much for your attention.
Hanim, thank you very much for this. So far, we've seen how the 6 principles and other practices and policies of the UN have evolved. We've seen one very specific example of how one UN agency, UNFPA, puts this in practice, as well as an explanation of the PSEA network that brings together the different UN agencies here in Turkey so that we can actually compare and contrast with each other in terms of our work. Now we're going to have a third speaker, Özlem Alkot, who will tell us a little bit how it operates in a humanitarian agency and an NGO, Support for Life, or rather Support to Life. So Özlem Hanım, over to you.
Hello, everyone. My name is Özlem Yazlık from Support to Life. Actually, it is headquartered in Istanbul. It is a humanitarian aid organization. And first of all, I'd like to thank UNFPA for organizing this series of webinar on the prevention of sexual exploitation and abuse. This is the first of that webinar series, and this is the 25th of November. This is the International Day to fight against violence against women. As you know, that violence against women is a form of gender-based violence, and also it is an example to gender-based violence. For that reason, in this first webinar, that coincides with that International Day. That's why it's so meaningful. So at this point, as the Support to Life organization, I'll talk about the organizational self-assessment and how we did it at our organization for the prevention of sexual exploitation and abuse. Eda, just before me, referred to the several standards for that self-assessment. She provided the detailed information to that. So I'm going to talk about how we did it at Support to Life and how that process went on at our organization. Actually, as a result of the organizational self-assessment, we are providing and developing some action plans, as a result of which, what did Support to Life did do internally and also with the other national and local civil society organizations in order to build their capacity. We worked with UNICEF and also UNFPA with their contribution and support. We did a lot in the last 2 years, and now I'm going to share my screen for the presentation, and I will go over my presentation. So I will continue by showing my presentation. I just request you to wait a second, please. As I said before, prevention of sexual exploitation and abuse, organizational self-assessment, and how did we do that, and also under the capacity building activities, what has been done so far. Very briefly, I'd like to introduce Support to Life. Not everyone may know it in great details. As I said before, the Support to Life is based in Istanbul. It is a national humanitarian organization. In Turkey and the neighboring countries, we have the community engagement to mitigate the disaster risk and also preparedness to disaster. And also we provide services in emergency settings and contexts. We conduct our activities in accordance with the principles of humanity, impartiality, neutrality, independence, and accountability. We uphold participation and independence at all times. As a national NGO based in Turkey, we have been working in Turkey in emergency assistance, refugee support, child protection, in seasonal agriculture, and also capacity building. These are the areas of intervention of our organization: emergency assistance, disaster preparedness and risk reduction, education support, capacity building, awareness raising, protection, livelihoods, water, sanitation, and hygiene. We have projects in these areas. Today, the topic I'm going to talk about is the organizational self-assessment under prevention of sexual exploitation and abuse. Eda Hanım provided you details about some standards. So under those standards, while assessing the capacity of certain organizations, what are the criteria we take into consideration and how the process go on? Actually, the most important outcome of that process is an action plan, and I'm going to give you information about what Support to Life has done to develop and implement that action plan. In order to prevent sexual exploitation and abuse internally, it improved its capacity, developed its capacity, and also Support to Life carried out some activities in order to improve and raise the capacity and build the capacity of the other national and local organizations in Turkey. And I'm going to show you some examples, some concrete examples of what we have done. So I'm not going into details of the standards, core standards, because these were already highlighted by Eda. Now, I will just inform you about what we have done internally regarding those standards. The first core standard is organizational policy. An organizational policy on PSEA exists and describes appropriate standards of conduct, other preventive measures, reporting, monitoring, investigation, and corrective measures. So Support to Life for the prevention of sexual exploitation and agency, we already had the code of conduct for the assessment, and also we had a policy on PSEA as well. But of course, these were reviewed under the organizational self-assessment and they were improved. And the second core standard is organizational management and HR systems. So what are the clauses that need to be there in the contracts or terms of references? So we improved our contracts as well, and I'm going to show you what we have done through some concrete examples. And the third one is mandatory training. The definition of SEA, and this is prohibited, and the knowledge of the personnel and also allegations of the personnel are mandatory to be reported. And all the personnel needs to take that training. And we're checking if that organization is providing that training to the staff members. The Support to Life provided the training to everyone, the employees, volunteers, and interns, and the trainees, in order to prevent the sexual exploitation agents. So we already provided that training in the past. So under the self-assessment in the action plan, only for this specific topic of prevention of sexual exploitation and agency, we incorporated an item in that action plan to provide that specific training. And I'm going to show you the example.
Core standard 4 is reporting. So the organization needs to have mechanisms and procedures for personnel, beneficiaries, and communities, including everybody. So these processes are checked. In 2019, UNICEF, to prevent sexual exploitation and abuse, the institutional self-evaluation was carried out by Support to Life. So a complaint mechanism for their staff was there. It is still there. And also for the community members, a feedback and complaint mechanism is there. But of course, these should be from the best channels with best access. And how can they be used? So this has to be reviewed. This has to be improved. So we had a look at this in the self-assessment. And core standard 5 is assistance and referrals. So to provide professional help to the survivors and to refer them to the service providers, there has to be a service map and the processes should be set. And Support to Life here has service maps and processes, but these are all updated in terms of the self-assessment. And core standard 6, the last standard, is the investigations. And investigation processes, guidelines, are they available? And are there any trained investigators in the institution? Support to Life for its staff and for community members has complaint and feedback mechanism. So via different channels, it is functional. Eda gave some examples about this. For example, there are complaint boxes, and there are some emergency hotlines, WhatsApp lines, And one-on-one, the community members, beneficiaries can consult some focal points. So this is being recommended. Of course, all these are available in Support a Life, and especially for vulnerable complaints, in the evaluation of vulnerable complaints, of course, we mean the claims of sexual exploitation and abuse. And to evaluate these complaints, there's a team doing this in confidentiality, and very urgently, these investigations are taking place. But of course, to improve more, for example, in the action plan, the investigations can be survivor-centered and can pay attention to gender. So for that reason, we have added a Turkish guideline. And when Support Life is doing investigations, it adapted UNHCR's guidelines. But within the scope of the self-assessment, we have seen that in Turkey, it is adapted to the Turkish context, and there is no Turkish source, so which is centering the survivor and which is focusing on gender. So we had the priority like this to develop such a guideline. So within the scope of such investigations, when we have a self-assessment, we need to do this. And now I would like to talk about the standards and what standards are checking. Okay, I have talked about this, but how did this self-assessment take place? Within the institution, organization, what are we looking at? Whom are we talking with? So very shortly, I would like to discuss this too. Self-assessment of the institutions, organizations did not only include the review of program content or policy documents. The assessment looked at all organizational policies and procedures. And here, self-assessment involved all departments such as supply chain, procurement, logistics, contracts, human resources, communication materials. For the revision of PSEA, they are being checked. And if there's a need for room for improvement, this is being checked. For example, logistics, contracts, and HR recruitments, staff training, TORs, terms of references, communication materials, and for community members, awareness raising activities are being looked at. And from different departments, so the related people should be talked to for this reason. And in Support a Life, to prevent, this is how we had this PSEA self-assessment. We talked to members of different departments, and I am coordinating this here. And within the institution, in which departments, with whom we need to interview. So I coordinated this effort. And as a result of the self-assessment, of course, an action plan is being developed, which is, of course, to the interest of whole organization, but this has to be followed up by some focal points in the line departments. And the follow-up of the action plan should be periodically and regularly, and this is also carried out. So this is the organizational self-assessment and how it takes place. And here, in organizational self-assessment, what can be the possible challenges and suggestions for solutions? So I would like to talk about this a little bit. This self-assessment process and the execution of the action plan requires devotion, commitment, especially when we talk about devotion or commitment. With a limited number of staff, it should be functional. For the local institutions with limited staff, it can be very labor intense. So for that reason, in which organization this assessment is taking place, we need to consider this first of all. And of course, the high-level management of the organization should be the follower of this process and the supporter of this process. For that reason, in terms of PSEA, to raise awareness and also to disseminate the to-dos, quote unquote, to as many people as possible, high-level support should be taken and it should be sustainable. And as I mentioned, for local actors that operate with a limited number of staff, it can be very labor intense and time intense, and it has to be supported accordingly, and the process should be adapted to their capacity. And if the support to local actors to put PSEA policies and procedures into practices is only project-based, it is very difficult to keep them alive. They shouldn't be project-based. If they are kept project-based, there can be difficulties in terms of keeping the process alive. So for that reason, local actors, the support of local actors, of course, should be within the scope of trainings. This is important, but by going beyond the trainings, mentoring or long-term organizational capacity building support should be given. This is very important. So for that reason, UNICEF's assessment, for example, UNICEF's assessment together with us in the year 2019, and as Eda mentioned, UNFPA's assessment with its partner implementing agencies is for long-term organizational capacity building. So it has such activities. It is not just about a training or a training level. This is very important. So long-term support, mentoring support, basing it on just on a project. So rather than this, a long-term support should be given, and they have to be planned for the long run. This is very important. This is what I think for PSEA. After taking the steps for this, these implementations should be kept alive with these long-term support activities. As the other speakers, I would like to say that if I was too fast or quick, please just give me a feedback so that I can arrange my presentation accordingly and pace accordingly. So what did Support Alive PSEA action plan address? Yes, I said that we do have an action plan. What do we have in this action plan, and what have we done within the scope of this action plan? All these items are realized. These bullet points are realized. UNICEF's and with UNFPA's continuous support, we did this action plan, and it included a standard clause in TORs and contracts requiring contractor, suppliers, and consultants a zero tolerance policy in SEA. It included PSEA responsibilities in the TOR of the child safeguarding focal point. Support to Life, this was in 2019 it identified English and Arabic speaking staff, and it completed UNICEF PSEA course on Agora. So first, Arabic and English speakers were identified. You may think about what Turkish speakers do. Indeed, Support to Life itself developed a Turkish training with the help of UNICEF and UNFPA. And at the moment, UNICEF's on Agora for PSEA has a Turkish language training. But first of all, of course, for English and Arabic speaking staff, we did this. And then one-on-one trainings happened via Zoom, and having an online Turkish course was very important for us. And within the scope of this action plan, we have realized this too. And in Turkey, for the NGOs in Turkey, we developed a basic PSEA online training in Turkish. And as you see here, 360 hayatadestek.org. So from this link, you can see these online trainings, and Turkish NGOs also, the NGOs in Turkey can access the materials in Turkish. And for their access, we do have a web page. And on this link, which is on the slide, this training can be also rendered in Turkish to the NGO actors. And as I mentioned before, UNICEF, for its partner implementing agencies, developed the content for PSEA online webinars via Zoom, 2 hours, 10 times. Indeed, this was 2021 objective, and some of the trainings went on in 2021 also. And it rendered some trainings to the other NGOs in Turkey. And UNICEF's partner implementing agencies for the focal points of PSEA, TOTs have been also developed as Support to Life. Together with UNICEF, we had TOTs. And another important issue is PSEA awareness raising should be a part of the trainings for community members so that they can tell to their communities about PSEA, and humanitarian workers should know their responsibilities, and they can explain what they can do, what they can't do, and how they can place their notifications. Within the scope of the action plan to prevent sexual exploitation and abuse, some communication materials were developed for adults. A leaflet in Turkish and Arabic was developed. Poster for adults in Turkish and Arabic. Poster for children in Turkish and Arabic again was developed. For adults and children in Turkish and Arabic, one video footage was developed to prevent sexual exploitation and abuse. Now I'm going to show you the posters and the brochures. Indeed, here you will see the products in a concretized manner. So their distribution took place via the implementing agencies of UNICEF, and they were distributed to the NGOs in Turkey. First of all, leaflet for adults. I'm going to show this. So it defines sexual exploitation and abuse, gives some examples, and explains the beneficiary how they can place their complaints. And also it says that we have zero tolerance for sexual exploitation and abuse. It is such a brochure. As you see, it is in Turkish and in Arabic. It is bilingual. This is the first page. So this is a brochure with 2 covers, and it is reaching our beneficiaries likewise. And on the second page, you see the definition of sexual exploitation and abuse, and what is forbidden, what is banned. This is being mentioned here. And on the poster, we give some basic examples, how they can place their complaints. We do tell this to community members, and also we repeat our zero tolerance commitment. Here you see our poster in Arabic, in Turkish, together. And again, for children, we do have a poster. This is developed for adolescents aged 10 to 17. Here, we do not use the sexual exploitation abuse terms, but it is a language which is in compliance with the understanding of the children. And all children have the right to be being safe and feeling safe, you know. And for that reason, we do explain the children that they need to place these notifications to the responsibles in the institutions as soon as possible. And this is the poster for children. What behaviors are wrong? And according to their developmental level, we are giving this information. And how can they place their complaints? This is being shown on this poster. And I talked about the video footages. And for adults and for children in Turkish and in Arabic, we have shot some video footages, and we have started to use these videos to prevent sexual exploitation and abuse. We have started doing our awareness raising sessions with the beneficiaries. If you are interested, I can share the links of the videos with you. And now, this is my last slide indeed. And on my last slide, this is within 2021, within the scope of the action plan, what has been done within the scope of the action plan. Within 2021, especially to the community members, some awareness raising activities were carried out. And for this reason, Support to Life trained its volunteers and outreach officers. And for PSEA purposes, some awareness raising sessions are being carried out by them. And also UNICEF's other partners are carrying out these awareness raising sessions. And now we are working on an item which is not realized yet. It is developing a survivor standard and a gender sensitive SEA investigation manual. We want this guideline, this manual, to be in Turkish and to consider the context in Turkey, and we are working on it at the moment. Thank you very much, and hopefully I haven't exceeded my time limit, and your questions and comments are very welcome, and you can do this via the Q&A tab. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much. We really appreciate this presentation by Özlem Hanım. And now we do have about 10 to 15 minutes for questions and answers. And we have a few that have already come to us. So I will refer to them. We've got 3 specifically. So let me find them. And I'll start with the first question. And other than thanking us for the training, of course, they are mentioning that as UN, we have a PSEA network, but they're very keen to learn if it's possible to join this network as an NGO. Maybe we can add some value to this question by not answering only the question, but of course, explaining a little bit what other things could be done. And maybe I would start by simply saying that the network that the UN has is to make sure that our 12 agencies are following the best in terms of international best practice on how to address this. But of course, there's no reason why other networks that bring together NGOs, humanitarian organizations, charities, or others at different levels could not operate and be established. Our network, for example, meets here in Ankara, but for example, in areas such as Gaziantep, of course, it would also be possible to establish things like these. But maybe I can invite any of our presenters and Dr. Hassan as well to add anything on this specific topic if you wish, or if you know of other networks that do exist that maybe we're not familiar with at the moment.
Just I can add that the UN network did have meetings with by invitation, we invited other entities also to be part of the discussion, and the intention is to have this in future as well. If I'm not mistaken, Eda can add that there has been at least a meeting already or has been arranged for that. Thanks.
Thank you. Eda, you want to add and any plans for the future in terms of having more outward discussions by the UN team and maybe encouraging NGO to NGO networks as well?
Thank you very much for giving me the floor. At the moment, regarding PSEA network members, they are UN agencies and NGOs participation, and regarding their participation model, the discussions are going on. And I think you will be informed about that soon.
Okay, thank you. I see other questions coming. Thank you. I see other questions coming, so I will proceed with them a little bit faster. The second question is on whether there's an expert pool that is readily available for consultation and trainings. Özlem, of course, has been doing this. UN agencies do it. Is there any central depository for where our different partners could go to get some expertise, advice, guidance? Who would like to answer?
I'm not sure I am aware about any specific pool, but when it comes to the discussion, there are quite a good number of PSEA coordinators. They have webinars within the UN system, and indeed, if it is not a formal mechanism, informal mechanisms are in place, and we will be able to get the names out. The very presentation and presence by Sophia from IOM is through that informal consultations, and as well as Özlem Hanım, that we managed to get names to be part of this webinar. We will be more than happy to support if they are looking for the names.
Yes, and of course I would also add, we've got general email addresses for different agencies. Some know us individually. Reach out through any channel if you need access to expertise or guidance, and we will try and route you to the right people that can actually answer your query. A third very interesting question, maybe for Sophia. Is it possible to access the ClearCheck database by NGOs? I think I know what the answer is to that, but I think there's probably a way around it. So, Sophia, over to you.
Thank you. That's a great question. But actually, for the moment, no, it's not possible to access this database. It's really about confidentiality. Like, for example, I can't access it either. It's to protect, the identity of, honestly, also the victims, right, for retaliation purposes and all of that, but also for the perpetrator. The way that this database is handled is that during a recruitment process, someone from the HR, right, higher level HR of the agency would then reach out to the focal point and the management of this database, and that person would search through it and send it back to the recruitment officer. So even at the different levels, country, regional, or even some levels of HQ, we don't have access to it. However, I can say that there is I heard of something similar for NGOs. I don't know if someone else can add more information about this, but there is interagency misconduct disclosure scheme or something like that for NGO, which I think is trying to create something similar. Unfortunately, I would not be the best placed to talk about this. So if someone else has more information, or maybe online, there is something specific for NGOs. I know they were trying to build it, following, of course, data protection protocols and confidentiality as well. Over.
Thank you. I'll give time to the colleagues to think if they would like to add something. What I would like to suggest is that through appropriate channels and human resource officers, etc., and at the appropriate level, should a query be deemed very, very important in terms of a very sensitive recruitment, I would not see why reaching out to one of the agencies concerned or to tap into the network the database, and maybe provide some information to guide and support while still protecting the right to confidentiality. And of course, ensure that we don't have potential retaliation as a result, which is sadly part of the reality that can surround the situations because of the nature of the perpetrators. But anybody else would like to add anything?
The very famous news-worthy case was an international NGO that they did have people that moving around between the other NGOs and agencies, and the question was why these humanitarian actors did not coordinate their acts together.
Exactly.
And I'm pretty sure that the HR departments in all the UN system and NGOs are on alert on this, and they will collaborate based on the principles on confidentiality and everything else, if need be. So if there is any suspicion or any case to follow, I'm pretty sure the HR departments will collaborate and coordinate among themselves.
Exactly. Maybe I can move on to another one. Again, a very good question. They're all very good. In theory, the zero tolerance policy implies that the PSEA policy and its measures are applied regardless of conflict of interest, or conflict of interest policy, it says here. But I think the spirit of the question is, can this be subjected to political pressure to keep silence? And maybe Dr. Hassan can add, but from the point of view of senior managers in the organizations, and maybe also can tell us about NGOs, the pressure is actually the opposite. The pressure to conform with the rules of the organization at a time in which we see in particular violence against women and girls, beyond just PSEA, more broadly, is so intense that we see it as a duty that is paramount on us. And we are evaluated on the measures we take. And should we not take measures, there rightfully would be disciplinary action taken. We have had many scandals that in the UN may happen in one or two countries, but the reputational risk is for the entire organization. So indeed, there may be a conflict of interest in theory, but the effort and the support of the organization at all levels is for justice and redress to be carried out. But it's a good question, because maybe in the past, some of these things happened, and this is precisely why two secretary generals have been so aggressive in formulating policies that dictate what is the correct behavior from every staff member in the UN. But Dr. Hassan, I'm sure you have something to share.
Yeah, no, thanks. You well said, Alvaro. The point is that yes, in the past things happened. Unfortunately, some even senior officials were trying to conceal issues and hide it from the public and so on. But actually, that caused much more damage and reputational risk for the entire organization, that the zero tolerance policy is that serious that everything will go immediately in public and will push, the decisions will be made at the highest level. So I believe the dominance of zero tolerance policy is very clear today within the UN system.
I wonder also if you can tell us, how does it work in the ambit of humanitarian organizations, NGOs? Do you feel that this really happens in practice, the very strong push for PSEA, even in potentially a situation of conflict of interest? Did you hear me?
Hello. Maybe I can give such an answer, especially when there's a conflict of interest. PSEA, so notifying PSEA may be difficult, or the victims, the ones exposed to, can be afraid of retaliation, and they can be afraid of their safety, own safety, and they can refrain from notifying. Indeed, this is what you're trying to ask. And here in that feedback and complaint mechanisms, to what extent they are important, we see it here. And also, of course, feedback and complaint mechanisms, yes, we are developing them, we're supporting them, but what are they in reality, how they function? And then comes investigation, and to what extent we are supporting the survivors. We need to focus on this sphere. And the second webinar is about this. This is very important. So this problem will be answered in detail, because in feedback and complaint mechanisms, as much as possible, there has to be multi-channels for these. Everybody should be able to use this in every language. Everybody, even the person who is most afraid of, should think about how they can notify. They have to be designed in that manner. Of course, the languages of the people in their native languages, they need to provide their feedbacks. Even for the illiterate people, for example, they need to understand the information that we give. And also anonymously. So these claims should be collected, and they have to be also investigated. And the investigations should be in confidentiality, and how they will be managed in confidentiality. How can we develop it? And within confidentiality, privacy, how do we do it? How do we manage it? And how will we explain this to the community members? And how can we build trust? And then the support that we're going to give, it has to be quick and sufficient. Because as humanitarian community, how shall we work together? We need to support each other, and we need to audit each other. So this is also very important. And here, indeed, we need to, I think, brainstorm about all these at the moment. Yeah, of course, we do have the commitment of zero tolerance, and within institutions, we do have our own policies. We have made steps for that. We're giving trainings. Okay, but in the aftermath, especially when it comes to such cumbersome issues, when it comes to, for example, concerns about notification. So how can we do that? How can we solve such issues? So here, investigation mechanisms, complaint and feedback mechanisms, and support mechanisms should be developed more. And I think we need to consider these more. And in the second webinar, we'll be talking about these in detail. And then in Turkey, as this network, we will be developing some good practices. And I think it will be a good example that we're sharing these best practices within the community. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. In fact, that gives me the opportunity to highlight that This webinar, of course, has been focused on prevention, on the policies one can put up front, and dealing with some response mechanisms. There is a second webinar in early December that will deal with what we're calling corrective action. So we encourage everybody to come to that webinar. But we've got room for one more question, and I will read it. Again, it's a very good question. In a corrupt or hostile workplace, where PSEA focal points can be in touch with the perpetrator and even involved in corruption themselves, how do we make sure that the victim can trust that the assigned PSEA focal points will take and enforce the right action? A very, very difficult issue. I can only give you a management perspective from my personal experience. At least my experience in the UN, and I've been in over 30 years, so I had involvement with NGOs many years ago, is that in management, there are many checks and balances, and there are many mechanisms through which you can actually raise a complaint. And you can go to these mechanisms, even if you're not sure they're the right mechanism. You could go to human resources, but maybe you think you should go to the legal office, or you can go to the ombudsperson. You may not be sure, but they will guide you. And these offices are staffed outside of the country, and it ensures that everything is dealt with very objectively, because very often they don't know the people involved. But in addition, there are confidential hotlines. And in the case of a couple of organizations that I know, the complaint mechanism is done through a third-party contractor, a firm, an agency whose job it is to do this and has no necessary vested interest in that country operation. And then they pre-digest or triage the cases for example, a legal office or an investigations office. So indeed, you could find a situation within the nucleus of maybe your small office that you don't trust the system and you don't want to go to the PSEA focal point, for example, in this hypothetical example of corruption. But there are many other mechanisms that at least in the UN exist. My feeling is that for NGOs, this must be harder, particularly small NGOs that really want to invest all of their money to support the beneficiaries. They may not always be able to pay for this large infrastructure of checks and balances. And it would be interesting to hear what other colleagues have to say. But at least in the UN, not that the system is perfect, because there has been abuse, for sure, but at least the system of checks and balances is being strengthened the entire time. And of course, I should mention there's also whistleblower protection if somebody wants to complain about somebody inside the organization. So that's another mechanism that I could mention. So there are different avenues. But Hassan, your thoughts on this?
Thanks. I think you mentioned it all. The whole point is that we have specific policies on protection against retaliation and protection of the whistleblowers. There are specific mechanisms in place that anonymous contacts and Office of Investigation. You mentioned the others, Ombudsman and many HR departments, ethics advisors. So quite a good number of systems and mechanisms are in place within the UN system, at least, and hopefully all of them together can ensure that nothing that has happened in the very past will never ever again happen in our systems. Thanks.
Thank you. And Özlem, any thoughts from you from the NGO world? I think you heard me, or maybe not. No, I think, Özlem, you haven't been able to hear me. Oh, okay.
Yeah, I heard. I heard. Especially, I think, regarding this matters, as pointed out by Hassan Bey, actually, it is important to make sure that these complaints can be raised anonymously for the protection of the confidentiality of persons. Therefore, if they have any doubt, they won't have it anymore. In Support to Life, the anonymous complaints shall be evaluated according to our policy. And we know that in some of the NGOs, they don't want reports to be submitted anonymously or by third persons. But in sexual exploitation and abuse cases, the allegations, the claims may also be received anonymously and should also be received anonymously. And in the training, we always emphasize that if you don't have to experience or witness such a case, if you have a doubt or a suspicion, this needs to be assessed and investigated. That's how we explain the feedback and also complaint mechanism, because it is a sensitive issue. You don't have to personally witness or experience it. Even though you just have a suspicion or doubt, this has to be tackled by the organization and should be addressed with confidentiality. What about the focal points? How can people trust those focal points? Because especially in small organizations, in small cities, everyone knows each other. How can we trust the focal point? Maybe the question that crosses your mind. Actually, at this point in the training, we also highlight that both in our internal training and also external training delivered to the local actors, it is important not to address the focal point only because, as highlighted in the question, there may be some allegations about the focal points. People may not be trusting that focal points. And also, it's maybe also possible to refer to a person that you trust apart from the focal point. We should be able to tell this to people. Otherwise, just showing the focal point as the address, it also creates another risk. That's what we don't do, actually.
Thank you very much. And we just had one last question that came in just a second ago. And that is, if you have a report, it appears here in the translation, as a regular citizen, maybe not somebody that's confronted it, but is aware of it, would the same procedure apply? The only point I would make here, and then I'll ask the panelists to answer, is that you feel or hear something, inform us, inform the organizations. We will find a way to address it. But specifically, the question is really, do you use the same procedure as SEA if it's actually a citizen report? I don't know the answer to that. Sophia, please.
Thank you. So if I understand the question correctly, so our colleague is asking if you are just a regular person and you see an IOM or a UN personnel commit SEA, like, can you report it? I think that's what is being asked.
Yes, and what procedure would you use?
Okay, yes.
Because you certainly can and should report it.
Yes, exactly. So absolutely, yes, please do report, even if you don't see it. It's not your role or responsibility to investigate. That could actually cause further harm to the victim. Really, your only responsibility is to make that report. And as our colleague mentioned, there's many ways to do it that can protect you as a whistleblower, that can also make sure that there's no further harm caused to the victim. There's protocols and processes in place. It's the same process for the investigation, of course, but really just try to give as much information as you can. And I'll just bring up as a best practice from my own organization. As you can see in my name, we are all in. So that platform, for example, it's public, right? So it's accessible to anyone that has an internet connection and that can read or write in English, French, Spanish, or Arabic. They can just go to the website, and no matter who you are, you can make that report. It's completely encrypted. And to touch on the question from before, it's also as a way to eliminate is a strong word, but to not involve, if you don't wish, other colleagues, right? So focal points or any of that, you can actually make the report directly. And since it's encrypted, the only people who have the code to open that report are the investigators themselves, right? So just to share an idea of something else that you can put in place if you feel that could help in your organization in terms of trust in the system. But yes, please do make a report, and you can of course ask questions about protection measures for you, and of course for the victim, which is the most important. Over.
Yeah. Very good. Thank you very much. Well, look, my job now is actually to hand over to Hassan for concluding remarks, but I would like to take this opportunity to thank Sophia and Özlem and Eda for their wonderful presentations, very informative. I certainly learned a lot. To certainly thank our audience, and of course to welcome everyone to the next webinar on corrective action. But Dr. Hassan, special thanks to you, to the entire team that you lead here so ably, and to UNFPA for being our global champion. And it's very nice that we have this collaboration between the RC system, UNFPA, and IOM on this seminar as an example of the UN coming together around this theme. So Dr. Hassan, over to you for the closing remarks.
Thank you so very much, Alvaro. I really appreciate first of all, I add my voice to you, and I'm grateful to Sophia, Özlem, and Eda for their participation and answering the questions and the presentations, very insightful and informative indeed. And also those who are behind the scene, a group are behind the scene to arranging all these webinars. And above all, I want also to thank you, Alvaro, for taking the time and being with us the whole time, actually. That's the very fact, I think it's an answer to previous questions that was there, that the very fact that the most senior UN official in Turkey spending the whole time and being throughout this session with us shows the commitment of the UN system. It's a policy that actually, one of the rare policies, maybe globally, not in the UN, beyond the UN, one of the rare policies that actually being implemented vigorously and religiously by all units of the system. So thank you, Alvaro, for being such a role model leader for the entire UN system and being with us today. I think the presentations were very clear and explained everything. The very fact that there are human beings put their trust and their life in our hands as humanitarian actors, as duty bearers. We are there to provide them with the shelter, with the food, with the health, with the legal support, whatever agency, NGO, UN, governments, they are there to be supported by us. Security, we have a lot of peacekeeping forces around the world that they are there to support and all their lives in our hand. And then that unfortunately cases that have happened in the past, and may happen in the future as well, that this trust is breached and shattered. That's really making pain in the heart of all humanitarian workers. Hence, is very vigorous policies on safeguarding and making sure that our beneficiaries feel safe and respected in our life. And quickly, I want to highlight that the UNFPA Championship this year has set 3 priorities for ourselves within the UN system and with the partners, that we want to strengthen PSEA country mechanisms, creating more networks and teams and coordinators that at the country level. We want to make sure that the quality service assistance is there, so that the beneficiaries can have access to those services, for example, by linking some of the initiatives to the gender-based violence initiatives other way around. So making sure our beneficiaries have access to quality services, and also strengthening the coordination and cooperation mechanisms at the global level, and of course in the countries as well. So those are the main priorities for the UNFPA championship this year. Our executive director is taking the lead, and there are several initiatives started at the global level and the country level, and we hope to be part of this global movement. I really hope that we never ever hear any of those incidents that has happened in the past, and UN with all these policies and reinforcements in place will never experience such a disheartening news and incidents that has happened even in our peripheries. Those who work with us, our vendors, or implementing partners, or contractors, whoever is around us, our role as duty bearer is to make sure our beneficiaries are feeling safe and respected. Thank you so very much.